Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. Please welcome Delegate Joe Lindsey. Good to see you, sir.
Good morning.
Delegate Cheryl Turpin. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedule. This is a short session. This is your second full session, Delegate Turpin. How does it differ, if any, from last year's?
This year I came in much more prepared. I had last year was kind of the trial by fire. You kind of leap in and you hope that you don't get burned too badly on your way back out. But this time I came in and I was prepared, and bills lined up and ideas put together and supporters lined up. So I feel much more prepared this time.
So how and why did you get involved in politics?
I've been an active participant in our local political scene as volunteers on campaigns for many, many years. And I thought a long time ago that I would never, ever let anybody run unopposed in my district. And I had the opportunity to kind of step off the sidelines and become a player in the game. And I did that in a special election in 2016 and went forward with the 2017 election, and I won that election. So,
well, congratulations. We're glad to have you here.
Well, thank you so very much.
Delegate Lindsey, you're going to be busy. There's a whole lot less than 46 days here now. You're on the Finance Committee, and there are a lot of issues around taxes as a result of what happened in Washington last year.
Absolutely.
How do you think that's all going to pan out? And then, of course, the governor has his budget proposal, and the Republicans will probably come up with something a little bit different, to say the least.
Yeah, and it always turns out to be the case that you've got competing budgetary interests. What's going to make this session real hectic and to a great deal phonetic is the fact that we've got to get conformity, in my opinion, the state tax code with the federal tax code, because otherwise you're going to have people paying hundreds and thousands of dollars more for the expense of having two sets of reportings when that's just absolutely unnecessary.
So as I understand it now, if I take the standard deduction on my federal tax return, I cannot itemize at the state level.
And that's one of the things that we're looking at, trying to have a situation where there's a benefit in doing the federal return process versus the state is not what we should be doing. It should be that we're doing itemization on both or not doing itemization on both.
Okay, we'll probably circle back on some of those issues, but I want to make sure we cover a number of initiatives that you are involved in, one of which relates to being a co-sponsor of a resolution that would enshrine an equal rights amendment into the state constitution. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a situation where Virginia, if we ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, will make it the law of the land. This is a long time in coming. It's appropriate. It's a circumstance that's very needed, and there should be a codification of the rights of women, as we codify rights of all other individuals under given circumstances.
And Delegate Turpin, I understand you've been involved in this fight for a long time.
For a very, very long time. I grew up in the Northern Virginia area, so I had the opportunity to march in that July 1979 march in D.C.
July 1979.
So we're talking 40 years, and we're still having the same discussion about equal rights, and it's time for us to do the right thing as a Commonwealth and pass this act.
And I see that there is at least one Republican sponsor over on the Senate side who happens to be from the Richmond, Virginia area. What will this do for women, in your opinion?
I think it gives us security. It lets us know that we are equal and that we have the ability to be treated fairly. Again, I have young women, and my daughters are young. They're 23, 26, and I want their rights to be protected, and that's why I'm a proud advocate of this.
Now, Delegate Lindsey, some of the opponents of passage of an Equal Rights Amendment suggest that, no, it won't become law because the time has expired. Congress set a date like 1982, as I understand it. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that that's just a bunch of political banter. If that was indeed the case, we wouldn't be having states again and again enshrining these privileges and changing this law of their particular states. What we've got is a situation where we need to call it what it is. It's a group that will look at justification for not advancing the cause and the rights of women.
Now, you were a former prosecutor, and you've dealt with not only adult prosecutions, but also juveniles. And I know you have some legislation dealing with juveniles this session. Why don't you explain what those relate to?
Well, the Supreme Court made the ruling some time ago that juveniles are in a different category than adult offenders, and that it should never be the case that a juvenile is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. What I've done is that for right now in Virginia, if a juvenile is at least 13, they can be tried as an adult, punished as an adult in terms of the sentence. What I've now done is in situations where people committed offenses and granted very serious offenses as a juvenile, there's at least a review after 25 years incarceration to see if that person merits further consideration for parole eligibility.
Now, I assume that that bill will be heard at some point in courts of justice?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Have you had any response from your colleagues about those initiatives?
Not from my colleagues, but from various groups in the community that very much favor that.
Delegate Turpin, we understand your background is in teaching.
Yes, sir.
And you do have some initiatives regarding teaching, and of course the governor in his budget proposes to raise teacher salaries by an additional, I believe, 3%, 2 or 3%.
Yes.
How important is that to teachers?
I think we as a Commonwealth are experiencing a crisis in teaching, that there's this huge shortage. We started this year with more than 1,000 students in classrooms with substitute teachers.
That many, 1,000?
At least for the Department of Education data, yes, sir. And we need to retain our teachers. Those that come in need to stay with us, and I think a competitive salary will help. I put through a bill with something as simple as guaranteeing a 30-minute duty-free lunch, which people go, don't you already have that? Well, not all localities have that ability to be able to say, have 30 minutes, decompress, get yourself together without having some sort of lunch duty attached to it. So, been a teacher for more than 26 years. This is an important, retaining our teachers is going to be a #1 priority for us.
So I take it that salaries here in the state of Virginia aren't competitive with some of the surrounding jurisdictions, to say the least.
Yes, sir. To say the least, we are. Once we take out the Northern Virginia teacher salaries, we are actually ranked 49th in the nation.
49th. Wow. After you take that out,
right?
Wow, that's amazing.
When we add them in, we move to 47, but it's still, we are better than this as a Commonwealth. We should put our students first. It's a bipartisan issue. It's for every person, every student should have access to a quality education.
Yeah, and I hear every day that teachers come out of pocket themselves to buy supplies, for example, for their students.
Every single day you do something. I used to do labs, and on my way in I would have to stop and get eggs or something. And it's always this constant $35 here, $45 there for a different lab activity you're doing, and it's always a constant little bit of pocket change, and it all adds up at the end of the year.
Now, you have some legislation dealing with teacher exit interviews. Explain to us what that entails.
Well, as a science teacher, we can't move forward without having data, and this was a bill that I presented last year. We had a teacher exit poll created, and it was being analyzed at the College of William and Mary. I had moved last year to move the pilot program to statewide, and it didn't pass subcommittee. And then this year I'm moving forward again with the same bill because as I sat on the Teacher Retention Summit at UVA, and you listen to the teachers talk about why they're frustrated with their jobs, we need to know that information. We need to know what it is specifically that a teacher is frustrated with. And we can't move forward without collecting that information.
So what were some of those things that came out of that body you sat on in terms of teacher frustration?
Clearly salary. It's very frustrating when your local school district suggests to you that you live in the district that you teach in so that you become part of the community. Well, when you can't afford housing in that community, it's a difficulty, and it kind of makes you feel bad as a teacher that you can't be part of your students' community because you can't afford the housing that you teach in the community that you live in. So that was very frustrating for many. Lots of people have to make choices between health care and paying mortgages because teachers just don't make enough money to do both. So it's salaries, it's having a duty-free lunch, having just basic common sense things that make you feel valued.
Delegate Lindsey, you're always teaching, meaning you're educating your constituents, your colleagues, members of your community. Talk to us about your initiative regarding making Election Day a holiday.
To me, it's about student safety. Right now, throughout the Commonwealth, there are a good number of our schools that are used as Election Day sites. There are our polling places, and I can tell you, having been a prosecutor, having been on the criminal and now being on the criminal defense side, there's some bad actors who are out there, and bringing them to our most vulnerable population is something that is of great concern to me. I believe that having a situation where we turn the election day into a state holiday, we avoid that. We separate the possibility of our children being exposed to that bad element, while at the same time, the agreement or the initiative that I've advanced has no economic impact because I suggest swapping out Lee Jackson Day to make that happen.
Are your colleagues happy with that swap?
Well, some would argue, that they don't want to lose the holiday, and my response would be simply make that holiday also Election Day. Yeah.
I think that makes perfect sense. Sticking to the issue of student safety, there's still a debate raging about how we should keep our schools safe, given incidents that have occurred over the last 15 to 20 years now in terms of gun violence in our schools. How do you think we ought to address those issues?
Well, and I was not on the Safe School Initiative committee that was set up by the speaker, but I'll tell you that some of it is that there are any number of reports that show that the proliferation of guns in the community add to the opportunity for conflicts involving guns. I understand my colleagues who talk about the constitutional right to bear arms, and I just simply say the Constitution doesn't say that you should be able to set up a gun shop in your home with a number of guns. I think it's about sensible gun legislation that looks at limiting not necessarily a person's ability to get a gun, but what persons have the opportunity to get a gun. Because mental health issues should certainly be a concern. Criminal records should certainly be a concern. Whether or not a person is in the throes of some domestic violence litigation should be a concern as to whether or not they have access to weapons. And and there's, in my opinion, nothing wrong with looking at we once proposed this legislation, 1 gun a month. At least in that instance, you're not having somebody just go out and stockpile weapons. Also, there are certain weapons that you don't use for just general home defense or personal safety, and that they are known to be mass killing tools. Such as the bump stock. That is a situation where we've got to look at sensible reeling in of some of these products that we have on the market.
And Delegate Turpin, you've been confronted with these issues throughout your career. When I was coming up, there were no guns in schools. There were no school resource officers. We had plenty of support to deal with issues, although students now are confronted with a wide array of issues at home and in school. Absolutely. So talk to us about violence in the schools and how you think we ought to address that.
I think one of the best indicator of what's happening in a school building is your teachers. And I think if we could reduce class sizes. One year I had 172 kids. 172? In 6 classes, and it's too many. And if we could reduce our student-teacher ratio so that a teacher really does get to know your students. Many times I would call a guidance counselor and say, have you thought about maybe checking on this student? Was a little off today in class, when you have time to do that. And when you have so many students, even in the elementary school and the middle school levels, I think we just simply need to look at student-teacher ratio. When I started teaching, again, I taught prior to SOL, so I've been teaching a very long time. And
Standards of learning. Standards
of learning, thank you, sorry. It's changed, and when we have to do intruder alert drills, it's stressful for kids. I was like, guys, this is our opportunity to practice being quiet. We got 10 minutes we have to practice being quiet because it's intruder alert, and it's very stressful for the kids. It's a very different climate that we have now than we had in the past.
Delegate Lindsey, what about the phenomena over the past few years that have led our schools to criminalize behavior that should be treated right there?
Well, there are a number of bills, and my colleague Jeff Bourne has been on the forefront of proposing legislation. He was formerly on the school board here in this city, that look at how we task our schools with dealing with incidents of mischief. And what we found is there have been so many instances where when you and I were coming up would have been just considered general mischief and could have been dealt with internally. It has been criminalized, and we're having this proliferation of cases before the courts. What we're trying to do is dismantle the school to prison pipeline, and it's best done by looking at what is actual criminal activity that needs to be before the court system versus what can be dealt with within the school system. Because what we found in the data that's been reviewed is that the tendency is that the persons who are most impacted are from the lower economic strata, are from the minority community. And what we want is we certainly want a situation where schools are safe, but we want a situation where there's pragmatic application of these policies.
And as I understand it, that study also disclosed, Delegate Turpin, that children who are physically and mentally challenged as well are often subject to discipline that they should not be subject to.
Yes, sir. There are situations in classrooms where a student acts up, and we have to consult with their case manager, their special ed case manager, to make sure that their rights are protected as written by the IEP. So then we,
That's the individual educational
I'm sorry.
plan.
Yes, sir.
All right.
This lingo, I apologize. Been doing it too long. I just keep thinking everybody knows all these. So it's important that we continue to make sure that the guidelines of the IEP are being met by administration and by teachers and by the best interests of the student.
Now, you both live in an area that's subject to weather extremes, and I know one of the big issues that affects both of you is flooding. Talk to us about the flooding and why that's such a serious concern in your district?
So when Hurricane Matthew came through, we weren't anticipating this crazy stall in the system, and my district flooded. And I was running in a special election at the time, and people's belongings were in pods on their lawns for a very long time. So this is a very personal issue for many of the constituents in my district. And I would knock their doors 6 months later running in the general election, and their belongings are still in pods on the lawns of their homes. And we need to do a better job of handling how we react to when floods occur. I have a bill going forward about expanding the ability for municipalities to protect old trees, because old trees will slow the water down, hopefully get it into the ground system versus onto our waterways. So hopefully we can get our trees to do some of the hard work that we need them to do.
And Delegate Lindsey, that flooding affects transportation, obviously. It affects businesses. It affects military installations in your neck of the woods as well.
Oh, absolutely. Sea level rise is something that's of great concern, in my area.
Yep.
We've got the military, we've got the naval bases, but, we've got how it impacts commerce, because when you have the flooding, you don't have the movement of commerce. You don't have it's a security factor, and that's been determined that because it impacts base operations. So I can tell you that the governor has advanced some initiatives dealing with coastal resiliency and sea level rise, and for a coastal city such as Norfolk, such as Virginia Beach. It's just vital that we do something now, because otherwise, all the data keeps showing that it's only going to get worse.
Speaking of the economy, how important is the Port of Virginia to your constituents and to the state of Virginia?
The Port of Virginia is one of our chief economic engines, and people look at it from a standpoint of commerce coming in from the massive ships, but it's also from a standpoint of the rail transportation lines that take products all over the nation. Yeah. So we're a vital economic engine, and we just need to preserve that.
And there's been a lot of investment over the last few years through the General Assembly to the Port of Virginia in order to maintain its competitiveness against other ports like New York, Charleston, and Savannah. I take it you agree that maintaining that level of competitiveness is critical.
Absolutely. I think it's a vital component to our statewide economic system. It moves goods, it brings in goods, it takes out goods. It's absolutely a key component to our economy.
Now, both of you serve on the Privileges and Elections Committee here in the House of Delegates. There are a number of legal challenges still pending in the court. The Supreme Court refused to intervene recently and won here in Virginia, and so a master is in the process of developing a map. How will that affect, to what extent will that affect your districts, as you know at this point?
Well, mine is one of the 11 districts that were primarily looked at in the case of the Bethune-Hill case. The whole ideal is that with redistricting, there's been gerrymandering, and so as to limit the influence of the vote in certain areas and it's been doctored to what the prevailing party wanted to be the case. This isn't Joe Lindsey's opinion. This is what the courts have determined, that there was a situation where the African American vote was put together in such a way to limit the overall influence of areas in general elections. We've now got a situation where the federal court has made the determination that needs to be corrected. They gave us an opportunity, and we failed. Admittedly, there just was not a situation where in my opinion, the motivation was there to make districts that serve the people as opposed to serving the interests of the electeds. We've now got a situation where the courts have taken over. They've employed a special master to draw maps to look at a fair configuration of the districts and a more fair flow of the vote, so as not to artificially limit the influence of any electoral group.
And of course, Delegate Turpin, this highlights the need for a bipartisan commission
Yes.
to redraw lines every 10 years.
Bipartisan or non-partial?
Not nonpartisan.
Okay.
Nonpartisan, that's a very good point, a nonpartisan commission. So what do you feel about the creation of such a commission?
I think it's very, very important that an independent group puts together our districts. I would love to be able to pick exactly who I'd like to be in my district, but we shouldn't be allowed to do that. I think it should be a commission that looks forward to all of the components and fairly draws the districts.
And of course, last year, I believe there were disputes about very close elections, and I believe you have a bill dealing with recounts and the procedure that should be followed in terms of recounts.
Sure. When people who have gone out and voted don't have an assurance and faith in the process, then democracy suffers. The situation in Virginia Beach was that we had multiple recounts, and some of the rules were not as fixed, and as a result, persons who were the observers of these recounts were concerned that they really didn't know the rules that were being applied to the process. My bill tries to change that.
Back to the Equal Rights Amendment, because I don't think it got a hearing last year in Privileges in Elections. I assume both of you will be pushing very hard to make that a reality in terms of a hearing and getting it out of the committee.
Absolutely. Last year, I think it went straight to committee and it was passed by indefinitely, just very quickly. And I was like, wow, we didn't even get an opportunity to have a discussion. Hopefully we can move it. We get a discussion and we get to have the opportunity to have everyone speak on both sides of the issue so that we can then have a fair opportunity to cast a vote for it.
So, Delegate Lindsey, you're going to have to use your skills of persuasion to convince the chairman to hold a hearing.
Well, right now, my understanding is that the speaker has sent it to the Rules Committee, and that, in some respects, may subvert us of an opportunity to do just that, to have a democratic process where all points of view are entertained. The Rules Committee, as configured in this General Assembly, is overwhelmingly favorable to the Republican Party.
Well, thank you both for being here, Delegate Cheryl Turpin and Delegate Joe Lindsey. Good to see you. Good luck for the rest of the session.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.